Hello, everybody. I want to honor your time today. And so we're going to start as more people might join us this morning, afternoon, depending on where you are.
So I don't know what can or cannot be done.
So I'm just going to ask during the teaching portion, we are going to be recording this. We will go into breakout rooms, which will not be recorded. But during the session itself, there are a number of people who wanted it to be recorded so that they would be able to view it at a later date. So I just want to make you aware that we will be recording the session today. Gwe, Nian Delawisi Crystal. Hi, my name is Crystal. Wadabekasi Ukdahamguk, Newfoundland, Dala'awi, Winnipeg. Hi, my name is Crystal. I am from Newfoundland. Ukdahamguk means Newfoundland in Mi'kmaq, means across the waters. In Mi'kmaq, we use land descriptors to name our cities and our towns and our lands. And so Ukdahamguk means across the waters. And I'm currently living in Winnipeg. I am the Associate Indigenous Ministries Consultant for the territory, but also I do consulting for the division in the Prairie Division as well. So I'm very thankful that you have come and excited for the conversations that we will have today. And so today I am joining you from the city of Winnipeg on the lands that have existed for millennia. Long before the commitments of Treaty 1, this land was home for the Anishinaabe, the Cree, Oji-Cree, Assiniboine, Dakota, and Dene peoples. Renamed in 1873, the name Winnipeg was formed from an anglicized version of the Cree word Winnipi. This land was traditionally named after the muddy waters of the mighty Red River. It described the landscape, telling a story of a place that Creator entrusted to the original inhabitants. We also recognize that we meet on the homeland of the Métis Nation, and specifically mention Roostertown, a Métis settlement only kilometers away in the Grant Park neighborhood. I share this land acknowledgement for all of us, hoping that we will realize that this is more than just words and formalities. Each one of us are called into the ministry of reconciliation, and these words offer a space to hear the stories that are often forgotten. Stories of displaced people, of broken promises, and colonial injustices. I hope that these words create spaces to learn and engage with the history of this land, and that this new knowledge will transform the way we worship, gather, and celebrate here in this place. And so may the spirit of truth and reconciliation invite us to walk gently with all our relations. Msitnogama Willalan. So on this slide, you'll notice two websites. The first is a created land acknowledgement template that can be used and adapted to your ministry setting. And the second website there, native-land.ca. That is if you're having difficulty learning about the first peoples of your land, the treaty information, even the language information. This website can help you learn more. You type in your location and it gives you all the details. And if you want, you can use the website to look up the first peoples and treaty territory you live in right now, and you can add it to the chat box if you'd like. Just as an awareness piece, because I do tend to get lots of emails about land acknowledgements, we are actually hosting another webinar on November 3rd with Holly Fortier from Two Canoes Media. And she's going to talk about land acknowledgements with us and what it means to be creating land acknowledgements and what goes beyond the land acknowledgement. So at the last slide, around the last slide, I hope you'll be able to join us for that webinar as well. So for these moments, what we are actually going to do is go out into breakout rooms. And I only want to do that for a few moments, but I know that our group is large and I want us to be able to, just for a brief moment, introduce ourselves. What's your name? Where are you joining in from today? And how are you connected to the Salvation Army? And perhaps one thing that you want to learn today as we gather together. So what's your name? Where you are joining in from today? How are you connected to the Salvation Army? And one thing you hope to learn. So I'm going to break us into breakout rooms, and we are going to chat about that dialogue. So it's only going to be a quick breakout room. It's probably only going to be 5 minutes or so. By the time you get everybody talking, then we'll be finished the breakout room. So we'll see you back in about 5 minutes. We'll just wait until everybody comes back from their breakout rooms.
Good to see you, Crystal. Sorry, I'm a few minutes late.
Hi, Shari.
I'm actually not by a teepee. I'm by a Starbucks, just in the parking lot. So.
Awesome.
Yeah, Tyndale went a little longer than I thought. They had lots of questions.
That's
good.
Yeah, that's great.
Very good.
That's great. So I hope you had an opportunity to introduce yourselves, learn a little bit about everybody. I like to do that at the beginning of these webinars because perhaps your paths will cross again. And it's good to create this community. Even though we're virtual, we want to ensure that you're getting to know people who want to learn together and connect afterwards, even though we might be not gathering in this similar space, that you know that there are people that you can connect with. So I do want to acknowledge today that there might be parts of this conversation that you feel difficult. You might experience uncomfortable feelings or reactions. And I encourage you not to dismiss them, but rather to reflect on them. If you have a pen and paper close by, write down how you're feeling when what was said. If you have your cell phone, open up your notes app or do the same. It's important to recognize your emotions, and learning about how you respond to some of the things that we talk about today will help you as you work towards reconciliation. It'll recognize things within yourself, intentions that you carry. I also want to mention that we're only touching on Indian residential schools today and a little bit about the TRC. There are various other colonial laws that were put in force to force the erasure of Indigenous peoples. So I would encourage you to read about the Indian Act, about the doctrine of discovery, all these other elements that have been put in place, which are still into effect today. So I want to begin us with a Mi'kmaq gathering song, an Olnu gathering song. The story is often told by our elders. They would take a barren branch, and they would talk about our people being separated during the different seasons, and especially in the winter, to find food. So they would go down the different paths along the streams and the rivers. And at a specific time in the year, in springtime, when the ice would begin to melt, and our people would gather back together, and they would sing this song to gather people from the streams, and they would sing it to the 4 directions to ensure that everybody would come back safely. However, this is a song, while this is a song of celebration and reuniting, it also is a song that carries some grief, because not everybody would be returning. You would learn about family members who had passed. And so while it gathers us together, we recognize that it holds a lot of significance. So the refrain is quite simple, and we sing it 4 times as we sing it to the 4 directions. Hey, Guando Day. Oh, hey, oh, Guando Day. Hey, Guando Day. Oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Youngie, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Hey, Guando Day. Oh, hey, oh, Guando Day. Hey, Guando Day, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Youngie, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Hey, Guando Day, oh, hey, oh, Guando Day. Hey, Guando Day, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Youngie, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Hey, Guando Day. Oh, hey, oh, Guando Day. Hey, Guando Day. Oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Youngie, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, hey, oh, Youngie, oh, hey. Well, Alan, thank you. So before we begin, I want us to have a prayer together. So I invite you to place your hand on your heart, to feel your heartbeat. That is our Creator giving us life. Take a deep breath. That is our Creator breathing life into our body. Niskam, Creator, the one who made us all, the one who created the world around us, the plants, the waters, the birds of the air, and the animals who walk across creation. Be with us. Show us your heart. Allow us to grieve as you have grieved in justice. We think about the unmarked graves of Indigenous children who left this place far too soon. We pray for their families, their communities. We mourn with those who mourn. Motivate us to be radical reconcilers. Journey with us as we seek to become people who follow your heart. Give us your hope as you have sent your Son into the darkness to bring light. Amen. And so I want to begin us today by really sharing the story of Orange Shirt Day. And who better to share that is Phyllis Webstad. And so I have a video from her organization that was created last year, but still holds the significance and the meaning behind Orange Shirt Day. I am going to stop sharing at this point because I realized I didn't click the share sound. So I'm going to do that quickly. And that way I get to see all your beautiful faces for just 1 second, and then I'll share again. Perfect. So thank you for bearing with that for me for 1 moment. And here we go.
Wade Wahwadip, Phyllis Webstad Squest, Strachum Chatstam Slagwin. I'm speaking to you today from Shawetmach Ulach, the land of the Shuswap people in Williams Lake, BC. I am third-generation Indian residential school survivor. My grandmother attended for 10 years from 1925 to 1935. All of Granny's 10 children, including my mother, attended for 10 years from 1954 to 1964. I attended residential school in 1973-74. We all attended the St. Joseph Mission Indian Residential School, simply called the Mission, located just minutes from Williams Lake. My son also attended the last operating residential school in Canada when it closed in Saskatchewan in 1996. To tell my story, I was living with my granny as a child, and when I turned 6 in July of 1973, Granny took me to town to buy me something new to wear for my first day of residential school. I chose a shiny new shirt. It was bright and exciting, just how I felt to be going to school for the first time. When I arrived at the Mission, my shiny new shirt was taken away. No matter how much I cried and wanted it back, no one would listen. I never wore my shirt again. Thoughts of home and Granny's garden, fishing for salmon on the Fraser River, are all memories that helped me through that year at residential school. Although the mission remained open until 1981, I never returned. I was able to attend a one-room schoolhouse just minutes from Granny's house in Dog Creek. The memories of that orange shirt being taken away and the lack of caring by those who controlled us kept me from wearing orange for a long time in my life, as the sight of orange would trigger memories of my experiences and the effects of my life from attendance at that school. I told my orange shirt story for the first time in April 2013, when preparation for when the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came to Williams Lake. Those involved with the event decided to honor the orange shirt as a symbol of the effects of residential schools and the need for Every Child Matters. Originally, Orange Shirt Day was focused on the Caribou-Chilcotin region, but thanks to social media, it continues to grow and have a life of its own, and has grown into what it is today. My orange shirt story is not unique. There were 150,000 children that attended the residential schools across Canada, and they, or their families, all have a story to tell of that experience. And now, with the recent news of the confirmation of the 215 children announced at the Kamloops de Shawetmach on May 27, 2021, another experience from those schools is brought forward. I, like many Canadians, have felt the emotional impact of those findings. But for the survivors, we have always known about the children who died in those schools. This is why I say confirmation instead of discovery. Even so, when I first heard, I felt like I had lost a family member, and that's how much grief I felt. There are many more residential school sites to be searched, and the number of missing children and unmarked burials will continue to rise. I'm still grappling for a way to make sense of it all and wondering how we are going to get through this. My thoughts and prayers go out to the families, to everyone across Canada experiencing this unimaginable emotional pain. The missing children have awakened all of us to the reality of the history of this country. This year marks the first year of a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and National Federal Statutory Holiday on September 30th. A day for thoughts and discussions on remembering, recovering, and reconciling. Orange Shirt Day is a day to have conversation about all aspects of residential school. It is a day to honor residential school survivors and their families, and to remember those that didn't make it. And a day to highlight progress in the reconciliation of Indigenous people and Canadian society. These actions are necessary to bring about healing for the future relationship in Canada. We chose September 30th because September is the time of year the children were taken away from their homes and their families. We chose the 30th because we wanted teachers and students time to settle in, time for teachers to teach students about the history, and time for us to plan an event. When I heard an elder say that September was Crying Month, I knew that we had selected the right date. The Orange Shirt Society has produced a number of videos available on our website for the purpose of teaching the past history and bringing understanding of the Canadian residential school system and its effects on Indigenous peoples. We encourage all to learn more of this subject. In closing, I want to thank everyone for participating in Orange Shirt Day and wearing an orange shirt. When you wear an orange shirt, it's like a little bit of justice for us survivors in our lifetime, and recognition of a system we can never allow again. I want to end with a prayer I wrote in my Shawetmach language. Kia el chba'a, de geld gukbi, gukstach guch pin de sietk, gukstach guch de juchinuch, gukstach guch de stietlen, el de saulqua, el de soup, el de geselgsten, gukstach guch chuchwedep, jucheminta ra chuchwed de galmuch de chwaset. Gukstjam, thank you for caring about what happened to us, and thank you for participating in Orange Shirt Day, the first National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada. Kukstem.
And so while that was completed last year, we recognize the importance and how Phyllis's story continues to sit deep, how we must recognize and continue to honor. And even as her story, she explains that her story is just one of many. This isn't a one-person event. It has affected nations of Indigenous peoples. Orange Shirt Day and National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is a day to stop and listen, to hear the stories of Indigenous peoples, to read and learn about the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the calls to action, to begin to understand how history has not always told the truth. And today I invite you to listen. In a recent Salvationist article that I wrote, it was about Orange Shirt Day, and I used the Mi'kmaq word of Jalasi. And it means welcome. We use it as welcome, but really it holds such a deeper meaning. To come into the wigwam, to sit by the fire, and to listen to the stories of our people. So today I invite you to listen. I hope words that I share will help you on your journey. I hope as you break into discussion groups, you'll learn from each other, and that together we can walk this journey. And so I want to share a little bit about history and the Indigenous experience. And so this quote really holds a lot of that meaning. Bishop Grandin quote says that we instill in them a pronounced distaste for the native life so that they will be humiliated when reminded of their origin. When they graduate from our institutions, the children have lost everything except for their native blood. Duncan Campbell Scott was the Deputy Superintendent General of Indian Affairs from 1913 to 1932. And in 1920, he said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem. Our objective is to continue until there is not an Indian that has not been absorbed into the body politic, that there is no Indian question and no Indian department." When referencing residential schools, Sir John A. Macdonald said in 1879, "When the school is on the reserve, the child lives with its parents, who are savages. And though he may learn to read and write, his habits and training mode of thought are Indian. He is simply a savage who can read and write. It has been strongly impressed myself as the head of the department that Indian children should be withdrawn as much as possible from the parental influence, and that the only way that one would become the only way to do this would to be put them in central training industrial schools where they will acquire the habits and modes of the white man." Sir John A. Macdonald started the Indian residential school system in Canada, and the last federally funded school was closed in 1996, the Gordon Residential School in Saskatchewan. The residential school system was created to remove and isolate Indigenous children from their communities and force them to assimilate into the dominant or white culture. Under the guise of Christianity, children were stolen from their parents, abused physically, emotionally, and sexually. They were forbidden to speak their language or practice their sacred ceremonies. Many died and never had the opportunity to return to their home. It isn't the history that many Canadians hear growing up, and yet this hidden history must be taught. We will talk more about Indian residential schools, but I want us to understand how people got to this place where they thought that mistreatment and genocide was okay. When explorers, settlers, and missionaries encountered Indigenous people, they considered our way of life fundamentally different, dismissing it as primitive, strange, as even heretical, calling Indigenous people savages or less than human. They believed that Indigenous people needed to be civilized to become like Europeans, to become humans. Dr. Wendy Peterson taught the European assumptions. And so she created these assumptions, and together these assumptions meant no civilization. So if nations had no books, then it meant that they had no history. No church or temple meant no religion. No courts or jails meant that there was no laws created. No legislative buildings meant there was no governance, no leadership. No factories meant no productivity, and no building meant land free for the taking. And so together, these assumptions meant that there was no civilization. And it's often referred to as the savage trope or colonial accounts throughout history that shout victory over Indigenous heathens, which demonize them in order to justify their actions. Official colonial history accounts were noble, brave, patriotic explorers, but changed the narrative of the story. Indigenous people became savages in need of European laws. And if Indigenous people were not human, then the land on which they lived wasn't really their land. It meant no man's land, available to conquer and to subjugate, creating this idea that it was okay to treat Indigenous people with disregard because really they weren't quite humans. There is a long history, much of which we can't cover today. But history talks about the doctrine of discovery, history that talks about peace and friendship treaties, about Indigenous people helping explorers, settlers survive, stories of pain and broken promises, stories of resistance. Indigenous peoples didn't just peaceably hand over the land. First, in Indigenous thinking, it wasn't their land to own. Indigenous ways of knowing explain that people have no ownership over the land. We simply have been created to work in harmony with each other, acting as caregivers to creation. Sitnogama, a Mi'kmaq phrase that I used earlier in the land acknowledgement, talks about all my relations. And this is a traditional teaching that speaks into worldview, that speaks into lifestyle. But land is our identity. Our language is based on the land. Our spirituality is centered on the Creator. Our community is all of our relations. And the new peoples didn't recognize that. Indigenous peoples within the colony had to be civilized to accept the laws and the ways of the colony. Adrian Jacob explains that the main feature of colonialism is that the colony becomes an extension of the motherland. Indigenous people inside the colony are expected and forced to accept the rules and the ways of the colony. Colonization represents civilization, and therefore the Indigenous peoples must become civilized in order to live into the colony. And that's why we see this progression on the screen. If we take the land and the territory, if we remove natural resources, we take away leadership and governance, if we remove worldview, language, spirituality, and we take the children, colonization becomes a tool, which is a success, a tool that can be used to harm people and then create the genocide. It is important to acknowledge that there was opposition to the residential school system. When Duncan Campbell Scott said, "I want to get rid of the Indian problem," and created residential schools, there was opposition. Dr. Peter Bryce was appointed as the medical inspector for residential and industrial schools in 1904. By 1907, he had visited 35 schools and reported of the appalling unsanitary conditions and the high death rates. In 1922, Dr. Bryce also published The Story of a National Crime, being an appeal for the justice of Indians in Canada, the wards of the nation, our allies in the Revolutionary War, our brothers in arms, and in the Great War. And he says that from 1894 to 1908, within 5 years of entry, 30 to 60% of students have died from an avoidable mortality. A trail of disease and death has gone almost unchecked by serious efforts on the part of the Department of Indian Affairs. So people knew what was happening in residential schools. The government knew, and churches knew what was happening and the reality of residential schools. And so in these moments, just the brief of history, because there's a lot of history there, I continue to invite you to learn and to grow in that. But I want to hold sacred space for all that we talked about. In a few moments, we will talk about the TRC and the calls to action. But in this moment, I want us to sit in the truth that we just heard, that people wanted to get rid of the Indian problem, that there would be no Indians left in the body politic, that there was no Indian question and no Indian department. I want us to sit in the truth that we have heard. I've invited Captain Jackie Wynn to read a poem, I Want to Turn My Face. And this poem was written by Josie Winterfield, an outreach worker for the Mennonite Church in Ontario. And she talks about her experience of learning history and wanting to turn her face away from the church. After Jackie reads this, we're going to listen to a song written by Brian Dorkson and Cheryl Bear. It was written to honor the 215 children in unmarked graves in Kamloops Residential School. And as we know now, that number is only the beginning of a horrific truth. And so I'm going to invite Jackie to read this poem.
I want to turn my face from it. I want to turn the other way. I don't want to think about the tremendous harm caused by the church I love. This church into which I was born, from which I journeyed away and then returned. This faith which has shaped me. This tradition which has given me identity. This body of teachings and wisdom for which I have such profound love. I want to turn my face from it. I want to turn the other way, but history tells us it is so. Or at least it does when it speaks truth. History tells us a story of colonization and domination, often in the name of God. A story of plunder, of taking what was not ours to take, often justified with Christian theology. A story of complicity with promises made and broken, of covenants agreed upon, then forgotten, denied, and abandoned. But perhaps the worst of what we did as a church was the spiritual abuse inflicted upon generations, breaking their spirit by taking away their identity and language, taking away the embrace of family and community, taking away the stories, teachings, and wisdom, taking away the beloved ceremonies, songs, and prayers. Perhaps out of the best of intentions, but with horrific consequences. We tried to shape them in our own image. We did not recognize God's unique incarnation in this land and in these people. We did not acknowledge the identity and gifts which the Creator had given them. We took all of this away and replaced it with structure, rules, punishment, shame, and abuse. What did this festering sickness have to do with the gospel of love? Lord, have mercy. Christ, have mercy. Lord, have mercy. I want to turn my face from it. I want to turn the other way, but I don't. I don't because I love the church. I don't because I believe there is a great big gaping wound in our midst that we can't allow it to fester any longer. I don't because I believe in a God of healing and transformation who constantly calls us to look at our lives and invites us to a change of heart, to conversion. Is God calling the church to such a conversation? If so, will we attend the call? What if? What if right now we are at a critical point in history? What if God is opening the door for us? What if Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission is our reconciliation? What if their calls to action are God's invitation to the church? What if we are, as church, being called to spiritual transformation?
215, 215 Indigenous children who can't come home. 215. How many more missing Indigenous children who won't come home? Why did it take so long revealing this ancient wrong when mothers cried through countless nights alone? The church and the government complicit in violence. How could such savagery stay unconfessed? If there's a God in heaven, you've been used again to subjugate, alienate, eradicate the other. I'm Christian, I'm Canadian, yet now ashamed of both. I weep with the indigenous and stand with all who mourn. Why did it take so long revealing this ancient wrong? The elders spoke, but we refuse to hear. The church and the government complicit in violence. How could something so evil happen here? Two 215, 215 Indigenous children stolen.
I want to turn my face away, but I don't. Gisok, wala liek wajit wala, nagwe gisi ulganmuik. Creator, thank you for this day that you are giving us. Thank you for allowing us to gather here today. And we ask that you enter where we are so that your teachings will work in us. We ask for wisdom so that we know that there is good in this world. We ask for love so we can spread your love everywhere. We ask for respect so that we will know that everyone comes from one place, from you. We ask for bravery so that we will not be afraid to do your work here. We ask for honesty so that no one will lie or harm any one of us. We ask for humility so that no one will be superior to another. And Lord, we ask for truth so that we will see you in the future on the last day with clean hearts and spirits. Amen. this is not where our story ends. I often hear a quote that talks about teaching Indigenous brilliance just as much as Indigenous trauma. And today we share in both. Indigenous voices have stood resilient. Survivors from residential schools are sharing their stories, and the government had to react. In 2019, the AFN chief, Phil Fontaine, met with Pope Benedict at the Vatican. Pope Benedict expressed sorrow and sympathy and prayerful support, but he avoided an apology. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission began its work under Justice Marie Sinclair. In 2010, the TRC hearings begin in Winnipeg. What you'll see in front of you on the screen is the 7 goals of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. They traveled across Canada and they heard the stories from survivors. But the goals were to acknowledge residential school experiences, impacts, and consequences, to provide a holistic, culturally appropriate, and safe setting for former students, their families, and communities attending the TRC. Witness, support, promote, and facilitate truth and reconciliation events nationally and locally. Promote public awareness and education about the residential school system and its impacts. Create a comprehensive report of the residential school system and its impacts. Produce a report on the residential school system concerning the following: its history, purpose, operation, and supervision, its consequences, including systemic harms, intergenerational consequences, and impact on human dignity, its ongoing legacy, and the recommendations to the Government of Canada. And finally, to support commemoration of former students and their families. From the stories, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the elders, and all of the participants created the calls to action. As you'll notice there, the calls to action, the 94 calls to action, are broken down into 6 categories, including child welfare, education, language and culture, health, justice, and reconciliation. And this was a 2019 status update. As of June 2021, these are the calls to action that have been completed, but also recognizing that some of the calls to action still need to be completely implemented. So even though they are completed, such as call to action 48, the adoption of UNDRIP by churches and faith groups, that doesn't necessarily mean that all of the hard work of the call has been completed. So it might look like it's completed, but it's still in progress and continuing. There is a document, it's on Beyond 94. It's a website, and it's an actual interactive online document that you can go in and you can click on each call to access or call to action, and it allows you to see the progress that's happening and all those different elements. So that's called Beyond 94. So of the 94 calls to action, only one had a specific deadline, and that was call to action number 48. And that was to be completed by March 31st, 2016. It called for churches, faith groups, interfaith groups to issue a statement indicating how they will implement the principles, norms, and standards of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights for Indigenous Peoples as a framework for reconciliation. So on March 30th, 2016, the Salvation Army was represented in an economical response. The Canada and Bermuda Territory also issued its own response, indicating how they would be faithful in implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights for Indigenous Peoples. So THQ has a Truth and Reconciliation Committee that continues to journey with ensuring that we are faithful in implementing and working at reconciliation. The celebration of culture is one way that I wanted to highlight today, how the Salvation Army continues to walk in a good way. Partnering with Indigenous Pathways, the Salvation Army is the only denomination in Canada that funds and supports a powwow. It drew from these conversations with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Major Shari gathered Indigenous Salvationists across Canada and invited them to dream. Little did we all know that our dream would grow into this reality. And so each year, for the past 5 years, minus COVID, we were able to gather together. We have a weekend of celebrating, a weekend of learning, a weekend of creating safe spaces, so that whether you are Indigenous, non-Indigenous, you can come together and ask questions and really celebrate the Indigenous expression of the Salvation Army. But there are other things and other ways to engage. So these are just some helpful tools that I would invite you, some websites that we have, some introductory books, and also some events. This recording will be posted, so I will share the link so that you can get all of this information as well. But just some simple ways that you can engage with the calls to action in your own local context, and walking in reconciliation in your own local context is really sharing about your new learnings. So as you learn, creating dinner conversations with your family and your friends, confronting racist and stereotypical comments made about Indigenous people, creating spaces for congregations to learn about the impacts of colonization and the ongoing crises affecting Indigenous communities, such as child welfare, land back, clean water crisis, missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited. Inclusion and involvement of Indigenous peoples. As you're planning events, are you working with Indigenous organizations within your community? Are you consulting with them before you seek partnerships? Implementing the declaration articles and the calls to action in your local ministry units. This past year, we did a webinar series on the United Nations Declaration. And as we continue, we hope to offer more webinars each month and talking about different ways that we can engage in community. Supporting local Indigenous artists in your local context. This is very important. If you want to buy some beautiful beaded earrings, ensuring that they're from Indigenous artists. Donating to Indigenous not-for-profits. Orange Shirt Day tomorrow, September 30th is Orange Shirt Day. Donating to the Orange Shirt Day Society is one helpful way that you can be a part of reconciliation. And inviting an elder or Indigenous partner to share their experiences, and ensuring that it's a safe space for them to share is always important. Events that you can attend. So I talk about these webinars that are happening, but in-person events such as the Celebration of Culture. NATES is a part of Indigenous Pathways, where Major Shari Russell is seconded right now is NATES. And that's just an academic community that's talking about what does it mean to be Indigenous and a follower of Jesus, but creating safe spaces for everyone to just come and talk about decolonizing. What does it mean to decolonize? I read the book right there, A Knock at the Door, and I seen this conversation happening, and I wanted to include it today because I thought this was a good way to talk about reconciliation, about establishing and maintaining a mutually respectful relationship between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in this country. And that's something that's often neglected, not looked at, is creating that mutually respectful relationship. In the Salvation Army, we're often known as the givers and the helpers, but how can we recreate the relationship that we have with Indigenous peoples in our local context? How can we make them reciprocal relationships? And so a part of that is acknowledging the past. Acknowledging the harm that has been done. It's important to name it, to atone for those causes, and then to change the behavior. When we start to see change, that's really when reconciliation happens. A couple of years ago, Major Shari and I, along with the Ethics Center, did a series of anti-racism conversations. And a part of that conversation was this journey of allies. What does it look like to be an ally and then transform into an advocate and accomplice? And this conversation is an important one because often we talk about allyship but it's not the deepness that we can be pushed into. And so as we transform and as we move, we see this pattern of moving into the accomplice, which focuses more so on the systemic issues that we see. How do we begin to change, not fix the initial need that we see, but begin to change the systems of oppression that we see? Whether it's in our congregations or in our workplaces. Yeah, hold on one second. And so we are going to just briefly break out into breakout rooms again. And I want us to talk about, it's going to be, again, a 5 to 8 minute breakout room, and ways that we can begin to engage. What's one thing that you can do besides wearing an orange shirt for tomorrow? What's one thing that you can do in your local context? Also, though, if you have time, so maybe you will, maybe you won't, but what are some other topics that you want to learn? Are there other topics that you would love to see from our department? Because we are working on the webinar series for the new year. And while I have some ideas from questions and such, I would love to get your feedback for all of the conversations that you would like to have. So we will, again, break it into breakout rooms. And I would just encourage you to talk about the ways that you can begin to engage, and perhaps even just sharing 1 to 2 ways that you can, what you can do tomorrow, tangible things that you can do tomorrow on September 30th, besides wearing your orange shirt. So we'll see you in a few moments. Welcome back, everybody. I am pretty confident that that did not give you enough time to talk, and I'm sure you could have gone much longer. And I apologize for cutting you off so short, but I do want to honor everybody's time. So before we do our final moments together, you are open to put in the chat some of the ideas that you have to share it with others. But I also want to talk about some upcoming webinars that we have on October 27th, same time, same day, same time, just moving the date along to the 27th. We do have a Let's Talk About the Doctrine of Discovery with Lenore 3 Stars. And then on November 3rd at 1 p.m., we'll be having a discussion on land acknowledgements with Holly Fortier. And so we're very excited about those discussions, and we're hoping that you will be able to join in with us as well. To register, you just have to follow that link, samissionresource.ca/learning, and you'll find them there along with a host of other webinars that's being offered by the Core Mission Resource Department. But we're really excited to be offering these and really hope that you can continue in this conversation with us, because this is really what it is beyond the Orange Shirt Day, is having these conversations about the doctrine of discovery, about what it means to write and develop land acknowledgements. And we hope that you're able to join us. I wanted to end our time together doing a 7 directions prayer. And so in the Mi'kmaq creation story, we talk about the 7 directions. We look up to the sky, we look down to the ground, and we look inward, and then we look at the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. This resource is actually available on the Core Mission Resource website for you to use in your ministry unit. And so we welcome you to use this. It also has a little activity activity that goes with it, and some calls to action that is included within the 4 direction prayers. But I have just limited here. After we do the 4 direction prayers, I'll be sharing in a video, Healing in This Land. It's a song by Jonathan Miracle. He worked with the Music and Gospel Arts Department and Major Shari Russell in partnership, and they created these videos with Jonathan. And so I also encourage you can look up on the Music and Gospel Arts website for a series of videos with Jonathan, teaching videos that he has created and developed. And so I encourage you in these moments to find your directions if you need to, and just shift. If you're in an office chair, you can just shift around. If you're looking up to the sky, I'll just get a nice view of your neck. So it's all good, but we'll do this together. We look up to the sky and we acknowledge Creator, the giver of life. You are the beginning, and in you all things belong. The birds of the air, the 4-legged creatures, the flowers, the trees, each one of us. We thank you, giver of life. We look inward, holding our hand to our chest. We think about the ones who came before us. Throughout history, Indigenous peoples were relocated from their homes, forbidden to speak their language or participate in spiritual ceremonies. They faced broken treaties and unmet promises. We sit with this reality. We look to the ground below us and we realize the great gift of the land. We are thankful for the things that she offers: food, shelter, medicines, clothing, and so much more. May we always remember to be good children, taking only what we need and protecting what we have. We turn to the east. In the east, we welcome the rising sun. It also signifies the beginning of life, the beginning of our story. In Mi'kmaq, there is a phrase that describes our connection with creation and all around us, Sitnogama. When we work in harmony with each other, walking together and recognizing our unique gifts, we begin to recognize our place in this world, never forgetting that our story intersects with creation around us. We turn to the south. It is the direction of the warm sun and new growth. It is a place where we receive openly the gifts of wisdom and learning. We invite the warm breeze of compassion to wash over us so that we can learn to walk the path of reconciliation in a good way. May we continue to learn the stories on the lands we now inhabit in our search for the truth. We turn to the west. This is the direction of our youth. In them, we see the strength and determination, for they offer us vision and renewed hope for reconciliation. It is also the direction of the setting sun, the end of one day with the knowledge that a new day is coming. We turn to the north and we acknowledge the cool and refreshing breeze. From the north, we experience the pangs of death and the hope for renewal. As the unmarked graves of children are being brought to light across this land now known as Canada, we must also realize the countless injustices that continue to face Indigenous communities. May this be a time for change. May this be a time for hope. And so I invite us to listen together Jonathan's song.
My father went to residential school, and during that time he was very mistreated. And before my father died in 1999, he called me to come to his home because he had something to tell me. And he said, "Son, someday there's going to be a discovery that takes place in Canada." He said, and when this discovery is uncovered, he said it's going to change the way this nation is. He said it's going to change things. I thought of that so many times as when I wrote this song 2 days before the discovery of what took place in Kamloops, all those memories came rushing back to me, that was what my father was talking about. And I believe God has given us as Canadians and as First Nations people both an opportunity to get it right and to see healing happen in this land.
You wear higher, you wear higher, you wear hey yo. You wear higher, you wear higher, you wear hey yo. You wear higher, you wear higher, you wear hey yo. You wear higher, you wear higher, you wear hey yo. You wear hey yo. We're here to honor you. We're gathered here by love to honor life, the sacred gift you breathed into us. As the sacred fire burns, the fragrance fills the air. The sun comes up in the east and our prayers rise to you. Our prayers rise to you. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. Healing in our land. We're not blind to injustice, we reach out our hands. The wall, it must be broken, and love will heal our land. We face the deeds of the past, today dawns a new day. We can't fight dark with darkness, love will bring the light. We step into the light. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we wait for healing in our land. Healing in our land.
If Canada chooses rather to have tears and mourning, and to mourn with its First Nations people, and then reconstruct our relationship in a new way, I believe that we're going to be able to see a healing that takes place. So right now, as you finish listening to this song, I ask you just for a second to pray and ask, what's your part to play? What's your part to play for the healing of Canada?
Prayers of hope and healing, prayers you heal our land, prayers that as we gather, love will join our hands. We sing, we dance, we pray for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we pray for healing in our land. Healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we pray for healing in our land. We sing, we dance, we pray for healing in our land. Healing in our land.
Thank you, Willallen. I appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedule today to join us. And I hope that as we journey into tomorrow, into National Day for Truth and Reconciliation and Orange Shirt Day, that we will stop and listen, that we'll find something local in our communities to visit, to learn, and to take time. Thank you very much for joining our webinar today.